Hi, I'm Dr. Vassilios Stavropoulos, and I'm in a meeting with Dr. Michelle Koldrakaras. We are both apologizing for not being able to be there. We wish we had the opportunity to be, but for different reasons, we haven't had that chance. The title of this presentation is Factor Structure of 10 Psychoactive Substance Addictions and Behavioral Addictions. An addiction has been defined as an ongoing failure to continually and persistently resist impulses or urges to engage in specific behaviors despite experiencing repeated harm from such engagement. A range of common behaviors have been identified, potentially inviting a propensity for addiction, including substance-related behaviors and non-substance-related behaviors such as gambling, gaming, eating, sex, exercise, etc. The latter is most commonly known as process addictions or behavioral addictions. Indeed, time-persisting and repetitive nature and being unable to reduce or restrict the behavior despite the everyday life harm has been identified as the common denominator between substance and behavioral addictions. Nevertheless, and despite a portion of scholars suggesting to emphasize on the commonalities between the two rather than their differences to better understand their addictive nature, others express concerns regarding the way that such similarities may be approached. These concerns mainly involve the risk of pathologizing common behaviors, the risk of inaccurately tailoring new diagnostic categories based on substance use disorder criteria or the components model of addiction, and the risk of not acknowledging the functionality of a behavior in the context this might be expressed, and in some cases, even one's will to engage with it. Interestingly, even scholars who acknowledge excessive everyday behaviors as being potentially addictive appear to disagree about their associations and their differences. Thus, while some suggest that addictive behaviors are normally distributed to the general population on a continuum from minimum to maximum, implying the occurrence of a dimension, others propose that different addictions are distinct syndromes composed by different underlying networks of symptoms. Within that context, it has also been proposed that addictions as a broader umbrella, broader category, include subgroups such as substance, behavioral, and more recently, what is called technology addictions, when one excessively uses a technological mean. Questions in relation to the links or associations between technology and behavioral addictions have also emerged. Are technology addictions a subcategory of behavioral addictions? Are they something distinct? And in that context, a new definition, a new term, that of internet use disorders as a subtype of technology addictions related to the excessive use of internet applications has also been proposed. Consequently, it could be argued that current addiction diagnostic challenges evolve around three major areas: embracing a more dimensional and/or hierarchical categorical perspective regarding the classification of addictive symptoms, broadening the addiction umbrella to also include non-substance behavioral addictions led by research into gambling and gaming, and a novel subgroup of technology addictions being discussed, considered, and in some cases challenged. Addressing such issues has important taxonomic, diagnostic assessment, prevention, and intervention implications. Indeed, it would help understand whether different types of potentially addictive behaviors should be classified and or included under the same broader category or family of disorders. Are they the same thing? Also, given that potentially addictive behaviors tend to be comorbid, with one often perpetuating the other, drinking alcohol to cope with gambling issues, an example, and in other cases succeeding each other, what we call cross-addiction or addiction hopping or addiction substitution, where an individual replaces one form of addiction with another, information about their interassociations and subgroups would underpin more efficient prevention and intervention protocols for those vulnerable to more than one addiction types. Thus, the current research aims are First, to examine the factor structure of 10 common psychoactive substance and non-substance related addictions involving alcohol use, cigarette smoking, excessive use of substances, sex, social media use, shopping, exercise, online gambling, internet gaming, and internet use in general. And second, to examine the internal consistency reliabilities and external concurrent and discriminant validities of the factors supported in the optimum model revealed. Therefore, the factors of the optimum model revealed will be regressed on personality traits, psychopathology features related to depression, anxiety, and stress, as well as coping styles. To answer these questions, approval has been received by the Human Ethics Research Committee of Victoria University, Australia. Interested participants were invited to register to the study by a Quadfix link available on social media. And participants' responses were collected between November 2020 and January 2021. The sample involved 968 valid measurements, 622 males, 743 heterosexuals, mean age 29 years old. The instruments to assess the 10 different types of addictions were all based on the component model of addictions with the 6 common criteria: salience, mood modification, relapse, withdrawal symptoms, conflicts, functional impairment, and tolerance. And they all had significantly high or sufficient internal consistency rates, Cronbach A, consistently above 0.68. Regarding personality, this was assessed with the Big Five inventory, coping with the brief COPE questionnaire, and distress psychopathological features with the depression, anxiety, and stress questionnaire. All the instruments, once again, were shown to be reliable. The BFI 10, because it has 2 items per factor, regarding its reliability, was assessed with Spearman-Rowe, and it was sufficient too. Aim 1, to examine the factor structure of 10 common psychoactive substance and non-substance addictions. Considering this aim, 4 steps were followed. First, the relatively large sample was randomly split into 2 subgroups: the calibration sample for the exploratory procedures and the validation sample for the confirmatory procedures. EFA enhanced by parallel analysis was applied for the validation sample and the whole sample validation calibration together at the end. These were conducted in both samples, as I said. Also, for both samples, all theoretical models, addictions as one general factor, 1 category, 2 factors, substance and behavioral, 3 substance, behavioral, technology addictions were examined in their sub-dimension versions, the 2-factor and 3-factor, as well as their bi-factor versions, which means that we have an overarching addiction factor, and underneath we have the sub-dimensions, behavioral and substance-related addictions for the 2-factor model, behavioral, substance, and technology addictions for the 3-factor model. The minimum number of items, addiction forms, required for an acceptable factor was set at 3 based on literature recommendations. As said previously, 1, 2, and 3-factor models were explained, as well as the bi-factor versions, and the 2-factor structure was deemed to be the optimum. You may see that the fit indices for the 3-factor model present to be a little bit better. However, this model, the way it was extracted, was not meaningful. So factor 3 had only 2 addictions loading in it, and these addictions were social media and shopping addiction, buying addiction, while factor 2 had all technology addictions, online gambling, gaming, internet use, plus sex, which was not also interpretable. So it was rejected, and we ended up with a 2-factor model, behavioral and substance-related addictions being the optimum one. Bi-factor models did not converge, which means we don't have one overarching factor over all addictive behaviors. Now, findings. The 3 psychoactive substance addictions, substance, alcohol, nicotine, loaded significantly and silently on factor 1. It was clear. With the exception of exercise, all the other behavioral addictions, technology and non-technology related, loaded significantly and silently on factor 2. Exercise did not load anywhere, despite being assessed based on the component model of addictions. Factors 1 and 2 were clearly psychoactive substance and behavioral addictions factors, respectively. Aim 2, to examine the internal consistency, reliabilities, and external concurrent and discriminant validities of the factors supporting the two factors. For the internal consistency reliabilities, we calculated the omega coefficient, which is considered to be superior to alpha. And for external validities, we regressed the factors, personality traits, coping styles, depression, anxiety, and stress. Interestingly, when it comes to reliabilities, the behavioral addiction factor was consistent and reliable, both for the validation sample and the whole sample, the total sample validation calibration. However, the substance-related factor showed very low internal consistency, reliability, both for the validation as well as the total sample. There are two possibilities there. First, what we do know is that omega coefficient increases the more the number of items or indicators increase. And in this case, for the substance-related factor, we only had 3: nicotine, tobacco, and substance and alcohol. And therefore, that could have affected it. And also, the literature hasn't recommended yet an acceptable threshold, a sufficient threshold for omega, in contrast to alpha, internal reliability. There is also a potential theoretical interpretation that the 3 forms of substance-related addictions, alcohol, nicotine, and substance, carry significantly different level of stigma and social tolerance. Validities. Both the psychoactive substance and the behavioral addiction factors were negatively associated with agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability, which agrees with the literature overall. The psychoactive substance addiction factor was positively associated with extraversion. The behavioral addiction factor was negatively associated with openness to experience, which contradicts the literature, especially when it comes to internet gaming and internet addiction overall. And both addiction factors were positively associated with depression, anxiety, while behavioral addiction was also positively associated with stress, which agrees with the literature. Both addiction factors were finally positively associated with avoidant coping styles and had no association with approaching coping, neither negative nor positive. Take-home message. The present study findings suggest that there is no support for a unidimensional model of addictions as a whole and or a general addiction factor. We have distinct things. There are indeed dissimilarities. Even if we define substance and behavioral addictions based on the component model of addictions, these still present dissimilar. Additionally, although some experts have separated the behavioral into information technology addictions and non-information technology addictions, the findings here do not indicate support for such distinction. This means that there was no support for a 3-factor addiction model: psychoactive, substance use, technology-related, and non-technology-related behavioral addictions. Given the non-significant loading of exercise addiction with the behavioral addiction factor, diagnostic inflation and everyday behavior pathologizing concerns are also reinforced. I wonder what would happen with workaholism if we had assessed that, or other suggested addiction forms. In brief, the present study indicates that even if alcohol use, cigarette smoking, substance use, social media, shopping, exercise, on gambling, online gambling, gaming, etc., are defined based on the same phenomenology of the component model of addictions, structurally, they do not comprise a single group, but definitely 2. Limitations. There are several limitations. This is a single study, needs validation. The data was collected from participants not selected randomly. It's a convenient sample using self-report scales. Participants were enrolled from the community. Thus, the findings may not be extrapolated in a valid and reliable way to clinical populations. Cross-sectional data was collected, and thus the findings cannot be interpreted in terms of the direction of causality between the different forms of addictions. Cultural differences were not controlled, and thus they may have confounded our findings and their generalizability. Thank you. And once again, both me and Michelle would have really enjoyed the opportunity of seeing each other face to face and being there with you. Thank you.